every job opportunity offered you in this place and you didn't follow through with one of them? Not one. You've had every single job. You're the only guy that has a contract to come in at 9 o'clock in the morning. How do you figure that? It's pretty obvious. You haven't followed through with anything in your life.
No, you just let the people who are in charge here with me and Paulie constantly.
I don't want to deal with people that have no conscience. If I'm going to be with people, I want to be with people that care. And if they wanted to make me look like a bad guy, which they did, they could do it. And if I said to them, you know, this is affecting me, it's affecting my business, well, they don't really care, you know.
American Choppers was more than just a show to Paul Teutul Senior. It was a family of some of the most talented bike builders in America, daring to design the biggest choppers from scratch. However, the constant bickering, the blow-ups, and fragile egos eventually hit a breaking point. Suddenly, familiar faces started to disappear from the show, leaving Paul to pick up the pieces. Which 5 did he classify as the worst of the lot? Why did they leave such lasting impressions? Join us as we discuss 5 employees who left the biggest scars on Paul Teutul. Number 5. Cody Connolly. Paul Teutul Senior, the horseshoe-mustached boss of the Orange County Chopper, popularly called the OCC, has finally come out of his shell to speak on the one topic he had been avoiding forever. The most painful exits he faced since he founded the OCC in 1999. And for most viewers, it only made sense that Cody's name was right on the top of the list. But what makes Cody so important in the grand scheme of things? When the OCC debuted in 2003 on the Discovery Channel with its own show, American Choppers, most fans looked forward to the welding skills, the framing, and, more importantly, the chopper designs. And they did deliver. But more than just the framing and the welding skills, 2 things were hard to miss: Paul's larger-than-life persona and his love for Cody Connolly. For long-term fans of the show, Cody was no strange name. He was the 14-year-old protege, who everyone thought was definitely being built up to take over the OCC when Paul Senior retired. But he was more than just a protege. He was absolutely different from the other gruff, grisly mountain men in the chop shop, who were talented as welders as they were as trash talkers. It was absolutely no news that every worker needed a good amount of crazy to cope with the inane schedule the shop had to deal with, and the eccentric personality of Paul Teutul Senior. So seeing a 14-year-old high school kid refusing to be intimidated by the chaos was more than fulfilling for most fans, and, more importantly, Paul. Fans watched their relationship transcend the shop and move into some sort of surrogate father-son relationship. Just a few years after his employment with the group, Cody graduated from high school, and the OCC team showed up like family. For Cody, it was a memorable moment in his life, having the stars of American Chopper gracing his graduation and showing up for him like family. But even families fight. A few years into the show, Cody was no longer the naive 14-year-old whose world was simply black and white. In October 2007, he left the show without as much as a goodbye. However, Paul played it cool, and experienced heads like Rick Petco just picked up the slack. However, Cody wasn't done yet. In 2009, he filed a lawsuit against Paul, alleging huge misappropriation of likeness, fraud, and breach of contract. For some fans, Cody had absolutely done the right thing, especially if he indeed felt cheated out of the compensation he deserved for the company's conscious use of his image. But for others, family matters should never be settled in court. But amid all the chaos, the U-turns, and the betrayals, one thing was certain: Cody had drawn a line in the sand, and there was no turning back. Sources close to Paul claimed that watching Cody leave and then come back with a lawsuit changed the nature of their relationship forever. For reference, he never showed up at OCC after the lawsuit, nor did Paul ever mention his name at the shop, or even in high-profile interviews. Suddenly, a name he once spoke every other second became the one thing he avoided like a plague. Although the lawsuit was eventually settled out of court, with no access to the figures involved in the settlement, the real pain in Cody's decision to leave and lawyer up against him got even worse when he figured out who he ended up working with. Just how much did that knowledge hurt? Number 4. Vinny DiMartino. If Cody's departure from American Choppers was just a slight crack on the family's name, Vinny leaving was the actual bombshell that broke it all. While Cody worked in the OCC as some sort of protege, picking up the skills he needed from all the experts around the shop, Vinny was one of the older heads he looked up to. Although they differed in age and experience, one thing held them together. They were both two of Paul's most trusted soldiers. Like Cody, Vinny was a calm, steady presence amid the usual chaos that comes with working in the shop sometimes, especially between Paul and his son, Paul Jr. But more than being just a calm presence in the shop, his expertise as a fabricator was highly valued by Paul, who almost had him as his right-hand man every time he needed to bring some crazy idea to life. And in most cases, Vinny just never disappoints. He was the one man in the shop who had the ability to make any of Paul's wildest ideas into a rideable piece of art. Speaking of value, he carried nearly as much weight as Cody in the shop. More importantly, he had known Paul Jr. since high school. He was definitely family to the Teutuls, but just 5 years after working for the family, he decided one was coming. Not Paul, nor his son. Vinny was leaving, and no one in the world could change his mind.
It's something that's been on my mind for a long time, and I'm sure people can sense it in me. But I came in this morning, and I really needed to leave this place.
For a while, fans, who just couldn't wrap their heads around the situation, created a dozen narratives around the reasons for leaving the show. Social media went into overdrive, milling rumor after rumor, until Vinny couldn't take it anymore. Eventually, he revealed that he chose to leave American Chopper because he believed that he had gone as far as he could go with the shop, and he just felt the time was right to have his own thing, so he created V-Force Customs. This time, the narrative was shaping up to the biggest climax of a soap opera. Think about it. Not only had Vinny left, but he had also gone on to create competition for his old boss in the same state, New York. To Paul, that was betrayal. The family had turned on him in ways he did not believe could happen. But there was a popular silver lining among fans. It was something along the lines of, at least he didn't slam Paul with a lawsuit. Yet the plot thickens. Vinny was not working alone at V-Force. In fact, he had taken Cody under his wings, and together, they were absolutely killing it. Of course, for fans who had followed the pair and their growth since their days on American Chopper, it was no surprise that they worked so well together. But for Paul, it was a dagger to the heart. Cursed with the knowledge of seeing two of the men who betrayed the family was not especially how he intended to see the legacy they built in the shop petering out. But if Cody and Vinny's betrayal broke him that much, how did he feel about his own son's choice to build a future without him in it? Number 3, Paul Teutul Jr. Cody was the protege that Paul Senior emotionally invested in, and Vinny was the cool, right-handed man who just went about his business and shied away from everything else. In contrast with his son, the pair almost felt like the perfect sons, who never talked back at him or fought back even when they did not fully understand or trust his opinions. But Paul Jr. was different. To some fans, he was the perfect clone of his father. Talented, volatile, and absolutely nerve-wracking sometimes. Their explosive outbursts were so popular, they became an important part of the social media meme culture as the years progressed. At first, It seemed like a beautiful father-son partnership that would bloom like pale pink cherry flowers, but nothing could have been farther from the truth. Paul Jr. has always held on to the belief that he and his father were equal partners in the business, meaning that they had equal stakes in the business, whether it was in profit or loss. But one fight was all it took to set the record straight. Paul claimed that he never truly saw them as equal partners in the business. He believed that he called the shots, and if he ever asked his son to jump, the response should be, "How high?" not "Why?" But Paul Jr. was having none of it. During the popular shouting contest in April 2009, Paul called his son into his office, giving him an earful because he found him sleeping in Jason's office rather than chopping a bike. But he believed that his father was simply making a mountain out of a molehill. He claimed that the work always gets done anyway, and he makes sure they are always on schedule. So he just couldn't process why he was getting flamed over an obvious non-issue. But his father wasn't exactly willing to let him off the hook so easily. He baited and reeled him in with some serious warnings that finally ticked him off. Chairs went flying, the mini-fridge wasn't spared, and the air was so thick with tension one could cut it with a knife. And right there and then, they laid their hearts bare, with fans expecting the worst, but hoping for the best. But with Vinny and Cody leaving the show to pursue their own dreams without so much as a goodbye, and the ghosts of the broken relationship between father and son still lurking behind the scenes, viewers wondered if the pair would ever decide to settle their differences forever and stick together when it seemed that everyone else was leaving them. But would this volatile son and father ever really find that balance? However, they just couldn't. Paul terminated his son's contract, and Junior waited out the non-compete he had signed with his dad for 1 year before he launched his own business, Paul Jr. Designs. Somehow, Paul Sr. was right back where he started, alone. But somehow, he believed their parting ways was the best thing that could have happened to both of them. Working together was the downfall of our relationship, and I am not willing to give that up again, he said to People magazine in 2019. Although they stopped speaking for 10 whole years, they eventually found a way to shoot content together, but kept their business separate forever. As if one son wasn't enough adversary, Paul Sr. still had to deal with another one, and he is even more reckless. Number 2. Mikey Teutul. Not every Teutul is the same, and Mikey is the prime example of that. Every time the usual Paul Sr. and Paul Jr. crash out happens, and the whole shop just stays away from the chaos, Mikey was always right in the eye of the storm, trying to defuse the situation in the best, or maybe the only way that he knew how. Goofing around. He could simply ride headfirst into their clash on a bike and tell a joke, funny or dumb enough to calm nerves. But since he joined the show, fans have asked the same question over and over again. What exactly does Mikey do? Apparently, he wasn't the brightest bulb in the room. He wasn't the best builder, welder, or even the guy who came up with brilliant design ideas. Yet he was there, blonde, and always somewhere on the screen goofing around. Some viewers wondered if he was actually tasked with being the goofball for the team. However, what truly plagued him was more imposing than being the comic relief. While Mikey is an unmistakably fun employee, he also wasn't really Employee of the Month material either. As it turns out, Mikey was also struggling with an alcohol addiction. Although it seemed like he had beaten the addiction, he relapsed every once or twice for 14 whole years, including some of the time that he was on the show. Consequently, on Season 6 of the show, in an episode titled OCC Trike Bike, Paul Sr., who was fuming with his son at the time, learned that he had left the show and checked himself into rehab. But more than just seeking help for his drinking problems, he had major problems with his father. For reference, in a private therapy session with a counselor called George, he revealed that his father had been trying to hurt him, but not just by directly offending him, but also by being toxic to his older brother, Paul Jr. Perhaps the reality behind his drinking is much deeper than fans were led to believe in the first place, and in the later episodes, the cat was finally out of the bag. The drinking problem unfortunately ran in the family. In fact, Paul Senior battled alcohol and controlled substance addiction until 1987 and has since never relapsed. But for some reason, he expects the same show of strength from Mikey. However, Mikey's issues, as George pointed out, run even deeper. His family had been divorced since the late 90s.
I think he has serious issues. They've been going on for a long time. I think the fact that there's alcohol used in the family, that the family divorced 13 years ago, perhaps he hasn't recovered from some of that.
Boy, it just kind of upsets me, but...
His father can't seem to ever tone down the aggression when he is in a fit of blind rage. And more importantly, his father and his brother have almost always treated him like a tug-of-war rope, swaying his allegiance to both sides while slowly snapping him in the process. And alcohol became his solace and haven. But even with the roller coaster, Paul Senior decided to inculcate the drinking addiction in one of the episodes of the show.
From my own experiences, that I could only be, a power example. I couldn't really, you can't stop somebody from doing something that they don't want to do. So it was a bad experience, a bad period of time. So yeah, I mean, it's always difficult for the parent, but I always believed that, just for myself, that I got sober, and I always said to him, if I can do it, anybody else could do it, and eventually he did.
Where he revealed just how much he suffered, almost showing a vulnerable side to himself that fans had never seen before. For most fans, it felt like Paul Senior had finally realized that Mikey wasn't just another employee he could simply do without. Perhaps that is why he was eventually willing to show the world that he was just as broken underneath. But while Paul did find a way to keep things functional, Mikey did not feel their feud was completely over. Almost assured his dad spoke to him because of the cameras, so just like his older brother, he decided to leave the show. But was Mikey the last employee to make Paul's life unbearable? Number 1. Rick Petco. As far as employees go, Rick Petco was one of Paul's favorites. Not only was he a skilled welder, builder, and fabricator, he was one of the most respected individuals in the building. While the drama between the father and his sons often unfolded in his presence a million times over, he just somehow never really interfered. He found ways to keep himself away from everything that wasn't about creating a chopper, and fans loved him for it. But unlike Cody, Vinny, and Paul, Rick never left when everyone else did. Instead, he stood closely by Paul Senior, fleshing out his ideas for new jaw-dropping choppers. However, when the show ended in 2010 and everyone expected him to turn tail and run like everyone else, he was right there by Paul.
Hey, Rick,
Here we go.
did it seem like this axle was a little too long? It like flushes up without even spacers in it.
Why can't you figure it out? If it's too long, it's too long.
Whether it was some blind loyalty or just a man who loved his employment and the employer and could never be convinced otherwise, no one could truly tell. However, one thing was certain. Even after the show created a spin-off titled Senior versus Junior, somehow fans could tell exactly what side of the fence Rick would be on. And most fans were right on the money. When the show debuted, Rick was right in Paul Senior's shop at OCC, creating choppers and showing everyone that he was the last man standing in what has been an overwhelming exodus so far. But just how long could he well and truly keep up with the pace of the show? and the endless narratives about the Teutuls. Not even he could have answered that at the time. But something about Rick was so special that he had both father and son, who were feuding at the time, come to his wedding. Rick got married to Brittany Cockram in 2012, and that's when everything changed. Priorities shifted, and suddenly a man who cared only about chopping bikes into grand modern artistic designs suddenly had his Instagram flooded with pictures of his daughter, Evelyn Rose. He had her in 2013, and she had since been the center of his world. For reference, he told Discovery Channel just how much she already understood the need for speed. It was almost as though she was born to immediately follow in his path. Suddenly, whatever happened at the Orange County shop no longer really mattered in the grand scheme of things for Rick anymore. Although there was no lawsuit or feud with the Teutul family on his part, Rick's race was run, and he knew it too. While the show did take a long hiatus, they were back in 2018 as American Chopper: The Last Ride. Yet it didn't last any more than 2 years, and Rick took no part in it. Not only did he need more time with his family, but commuting from Pennsylvania to New York for work at the OCC for over a decade was no longer a risk worth taking since he had a family. Perhaps Rick wasn't entirely the worst employee Paul ever had, but sources close to him revealed that he would have loved for Rick to stay longer than he did, especially since everyone else had left. Maybe this is the legacy of Paul Teutul Senior, crazy enough to dare the impossible, but too volatile to keep it all together. Do you think Paul Teutul Senior could have gone about his business any better? Which of these 5 do you think hurt Paul the most? Share your thoughts with us in the comments section. Remember to like, share, and subscribe for more. Also, click the next video showing on your screen. You will enjoy it.